Awesome. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Before we get going and jump into your current experiences with us, I want to focus a bit about your history before joining Fiskal. So tell me a bit about what you were doing before joining us as a systems specialist.
So professionally, I was a brewer for several years at Jack Black Brewing beer company, and so I worked my way up to being a senior brewer there, one of the shift lead brewers, but before then, I also have been studying a Bachelor of Commerce business management degree, and while doing all of this, I also had a side hustle in the e-commerce space.
In the e-commerce space,
yeah,
that's pretty cool. Well, I think one of the items that's quite important in brewing is product consistency, right?
Yeah.
Now, I mean, how do you achieve, what's your game plan for achieving product consistency?
Well, you've got to have all of the same inputs, but the same inputs are a little bit more scientific. You can't just take a unit or like 1 gram of one hop, for example, and expect it to be very consistent throughout different batches from the supplier. And so you have to measure specific units inside the hop to make sure that, which are called alpha acids, and there are other types of acids and fats that you want, or oils rather, that you want to stay consistent throughout the product. And that's one of the consistency issues. Is within the hop you've got different oils that you want to keep consistent, and then the same thing with the grain, with the barley and the wheat, or the malt. You've got to stay consistent on the amount of proteins and sugars and diastatic power for certain things, and so it really is about measuring more than just quantity.
100%. So if you take a step backwards, it sounds like there's a lot of variables in inputs that has to be managed to be able to achieve a consistent output.
Yes.
Now, I'm pretty sure for a lot of those things, it's mathematical and there's a process to it.
Yeah.
Which leads me probably into the next question, saying, how well documented does your processes needs to be if you want to be successful in a brewing one, and to achieve a consistent product?
Yeah, so there's got to be documentation throughout for numerous reasons. For handovers, so if you've got multiple brewers in a brewery and they're all making this, the same products, then they need to know what was happening in the past to make sure that if that product was good, so there's a historical data that you want to keep. So once the product is made, it goes through testing, through tasting, if it's good, and it's a bit of an R&D type of thing at the beginning of a brewery's life, and then it aids in that consistency towards the end of it, or towards the actual life of the brewery. And then you also need that for taxes, for tax purposes and SARS and whatnot. So it's vitally important to have all of the documentation in place, and also, like you say, like an SOP, like a standard operating procedure in place for consistency. Because you've got different brewers in your plant, and even if you're the same brewer, it's a different day. You can't remember everything, so rather have it documented.
100%.
Yeah.
And you have to hand over between shifts.
Yep. In a more commercial brewery, for sure. Some of the smaller breweries, they only run one shift, and there's maybe only one brewer in the company, and so but then again, it's like you're only brewing this beer once or twice every month, so you can't remember all that well.
100%. So I mean, systems and processes become vitally important to achieve consistent outputs, quality, and, as you said, documentation between teams, to be able to hand over, and for reporting purposes to either external stakeholders or internal management.
100%.
100%. Now, why I asked about your history and your brewing processes, did that naturally draw you to a product like Cin7?
It would, for sure. I think Cin7 offers a lot of the functionality that a brewery would be able to use. I'm still trying to figure out if a brewery would fit in Cin7 with the advanced manufacturing module. And I still have yet to figure that out. But I think there's definitely a function in there that you could use for a brewery to make sure that everything is worked out correctly.
But if we take a step back, I think the before specific application is saying that from the brewing world that you've come from, you've got this, like you said, systems and processes become vitally important to ensure consistency of output and quality of output. And how does that experience fit onto a product like Cin7?
Yeah, very well. I mean, it's perfect for documenting everything. It's got a place for everything in there, and the workflow is logical, and it doesn't seem like there's any stone that's left unturned. Yeah,
100%. So if I'm thinking about what we've seen mostly of implementations that have failed, or systems or ERP implementations that haven't yielded results yet, it usually comes down to adoption. People adopting to the processes and technology. Now, there's a key bridge there for me. Now, someone coming from a process-driven experience, what would you say is your top tip for bridging that gap?
Communication. I think you've got to communicate the reason why. I think whenever I look back at, if somebody told me to change the way I do something, I need to know why. Otherwise, I'm probably not going to hold it and run with it, And so you've got to communicate with everybody involved who are using the application as to why they're doing it, why it's important. So I think it really does boil down to communication.
Yeah. 100%. Like, why do we need to change this?
Yeah.
What does the outcome look like if we've changed it? What does the outcome look like?
Yeah.
And then training.
Yeah.
You can't introduce a new process or a new technology without giving the team the training that they need to onboard.
Definitely.
100%. I've got a question. Someone that you've come from, as you've mentioned, from a brewing experience. You haven't worked with Cin7 before.
No.
And being new to Cin7, what is your overall experience with the product, with the system?
It's very well thought out and laid out, and it's big, which is it's very functional. Like, I don't know how to describe it really, because it's not clunky. Like, it doesn't feel all over the place or broken or old. It feels quite fresh as well, and it's very intuitive. I think that's the best way that I could say it, because it hasn't taken me very long to figure out how it all works together. I mean, there's still obviously things that I need to learn, but from zero to where I am now, I think it's what has helped is the layout of, like, the UI of Cin7, the user interface of Cin7 is very intuitive, and then the workflow of how all of it fits together is logical. The one aspect that I think is really important to note here is that you have to have a bit of an accounting fundamentals knowledge. If you don't have that, you might struggle with the application of Cin7 within your organization. Yeah.
Interesting. Now, the question, I view it as operational and finance, and a lot of the finance and ops have to interact.
Yeah.
Quite closely to ensure that there's a successful implementation, and one that the processes that is mapped out talk to each other.
Yeah.
So it's like a working together. And a lot of the times when we get called in for an implementation, there isn't finance. It's mainly operational.
Yeah.
So we have to kind of guide from a finance point of view, but I also believe finance needs to be bolted on top of operations. Finance shouldn't dictate or let the tail wag the dog.
Yeah.
We say operations comes first, and then your finance processes gets bolt on.
Yeah, and it's a good point you brought up, because I think in my experience, I've never really put the two as being closely related. I always saw it as like separate parts of a business that just use data from one another. But the way that Cin7 operates is it really integrates them together. But as you're saying, it allows operations to take the lead. Yeah.
Interesting. And tell me, in terms of onboarding otherwise, is there any key learnings that you had in the past few months, just learning the new tool and onboarding to the new system?
Other than it being a lot, like there's a lot to learn. Like I said, it's big. I can't think of anything specific that's a key takeaway, other than, like I said, it really bridging the gap between operations and finance. Yeah.
And Cin7's got a learning academy.
They do. Yeah.
They do have a learning academy. Yeah. What's your experience with that?
It's great. It's very, very good. I think it touches on everything from a functional point of view. It doesn't really go too much into the finance or the accounting point of view, but from functions and operations, very, very good resource to learn from. Like really, really good. The 101, the Cin7 101, the 201, and then the 301 sessions are really informative.
Yeah. But there's always a balance to strike, in terms of like introducing a subject, not being too technical at the start.
Yes. Yeah.
And balancing that off with, giving enough information so that it's usable. So do you think they've struck that balance well?
Definitely. They don't go too in depth. Like problem solving, for example, they're not going through that, but they are going through the functions of or how Cin7 functions, and just like the workflow of creating a product, or the sales process, or mapping certain accounts, with an integration with QBO or Xero, but they're not going problem solving.
100%. So, Ryan, overall, what would you say? Do you have any top tips for business owners that's new to Cin7?
Documentation. I think, as we pointed out earlier, I think documentation is probably the most important aspect of a Cin7 implementation. If you don't have those documents, it makes the implementation longer.
What documentation is that, would you say?
It's product details, customer details, sales channels, all of the details that you associate with those. So that's like your SKUs, product names, product descriptions, your BOMs.
What is a BOM?
A bill of material.
Bill of material. No, 100%.
And then going further, if you want to go into like an advanced manufacturing, how assemblies are done, if you've got a production plan, that sort of thing, and so the details are very, very important, and to have them documented before you implement is key, I think. Otherwise, that implementation will take a very long time.
100%. So basically, suggesting that running through your processes, your business, what is your operation, writing it down. Start off with a well-documented, thought-out process, A to Z.
Yeah. And having SOPs, so having
standard operating procedures.
Yeah, so that that, like you're saying, having all of that, having the processes documented, that's what would help, especially with the workflows of how Cin7 integrates with accounting software and sales channel software, like Shopify, and on the other ends, Xero or QBO.
So, I mean, just from a business owner's point of view, saying that if I've got my business processes mapped out, and I've got all the items you suggested documented well, and my current standard operating procedures, do that first, make sure that's right, and you have that documentation before looking at implementing a Cin7.
Definitely, because I think it number one, other than having it available, it helps the user understand everything to do with that process. So that you can actually implement it correctly and not mismatch anything and have to go back to the drawing board and make mistakes and so on. Yeah.
Good question. How often do you see standard operating procedures change because you're implementing a Cin7?
So I haven't been involved in too many implementations yet, but I think it's a nature of the implementation that because you're integrating a different workflow or something, you're putting a piece of the puzzle into that workflow, it would naturally change. But I think the fundamentals of flow, it doesn't really change because you have your sale, for example. You on a sales channel, you have your sale, and then it goes. You allocate inventory, you go fulfill it, and then you have your accounting software that will obviously there's a little bit more to it, but you're mapping or you're matching the transactions to that. But Cin7 is just making that workflow a little bit more automated and
100%.
accurate, so that there's not as much manual interventions that are required.
Perfect. So apart from documentation, to standard operating procedures for how you currently do things, is there any other practical advice that you've got for business owners new to Cin7?
Just communication with stakeholders. Mostly internal stakeholders. I think, just making sure that everybody's on the same page, that there's a clear direction, there's a clear reason. I think that's very important because, like I said earlier, nobody really wants to do something if they don't know why. Or at least I don't.
Well, that goes for any project.
Yeah.
That's any rollout, any project, any change that you want another human being to participate in. They have to understand why.
100%.
Okay. Perfect. Well, thanks so much for joining me.
Cool. Thank you.
And discussing Cin7 and your experiences with it.
Yeah.